Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. And I hear this comment often, and it's something that we are aware of, but we tend to overlook, we tend to rationalize. Or, it's interesting. It's funny how we get used to the people around us and we sort of lose them as the reflection that they are, as well as the reflection that we are in the process, because we just get used to it, right? It's something we see all the time. And it's interesting how we can notice odd and unusual energies and things reflect back to us with people that we don't see every day, but then we might miss some stuff with those who are in our everyday. So there's a lot to talk about here because it's actually sort of a can of worms. There's a lot of different areas to go. What we're talking about is, what do you do when you're in a good place energetically and those around you aren't, right? Or what do you do? What do you be? And I have a lot of clients and others that I know in the spiritual community who will say that, oh, well, I'm in a great place, but my spouse, but my kids, but my parents or my friends or my peers. It's interesting. Somebody I was talking about was like, okay, they were so excited. They had changed jobs, got into a much better environment, and they were very happy doing what they were doing. And then they were like, but I also realized that even though I'm really happy doing my job, that the longer I'm here, I just realize I'm just on a different plane of existence from the people that I'm working with. Good morning, Anne. And I said, well, there's a couple of things there's so many different aspects of looking at that. But I hear all the time, let's look at it from a couple of different perspectives. Let's start with one of when somebody says, well, I'm in a great place and everybody around me is not. So you have choices. You always have choices to be around the people who you're around, or you can choose to be elsewhere. It's always a choice. And so many say, well, I can't help it to be around my spouse. Well, you can. You've chosen to be with your spouse. You can choose to be without them. You can choose to be without them too. However, the thing I always come to in any situation has to do with, how does it reflect back to me? Like, what is it reflecting back to me if so many around me are that uncomfortable, that unhappy? What is it reflecting back to me? Because really, our reality is our mirror, right? So when we set our reality up to say things like, if I create my reality, and I do, then having is evidence of wanting, which means that whatever I have in my purview of negativity and people around me might, it's just a reflection of what's inside of me and what I want to remind myself, right? So then when we do that, when we say, okay, so what am I hiding? Is there something I'm hiding within myself? There's so many things to look at, because this is what I do all the time. This is constantly something to notice. So there's a couple of different aspects to take. And again, it goes back to, as I always say, first and foremost, guidance. What does your guidance say? Not your ego saying, oh, well, I have to be here or I can't leave, because that's your ego, right? Because your ego will come up with all these excuses of, oh, no, because I've got to stay at this job, or I've got to stay in this situation, or I've got to stay in this, relationship because I can't support myself on my own, or all that kind of stuff. However, there's so many different facets. It's like this. When we have this situation where we have been in a group of people and we have shifted and they seem to stay in the same place, maybe sometimes when you feel like that dissonance of, I have nothing to say to them, we really don't have anything to talk about, and I really am not interested in the conversation anymore, and there's no judgment there, then we can choose to move on to something else, right? We can choose to move on to other relationships. And sometimes, what I tell many often is that, just because we cross each other's paths, no matter how much we love or enjoy being in each other's company, it doesn't mean that we're always to be in each other's lives forever, right? So it can sometimes be for a sentence, like in a book. It can sometimes be in a sentence, for a paragraph, for a page, for a chapter, and then sometimes for, multiple chapters and sometimes the whole book. It's all different. And it all has to do with what we've chosen in terms of our soul tribe, all that kind of stuff, but also where we resonate, what resonates with us. And sometimes when we change drastically or somebody else changes drastically, it's time for us to step away and just, go on our own journeys. And then sometimes a time passes and then you somehow like sync up again and then you cross paths again. And then it's time maybe 4 chapters down. So there's that kind of letting go, right? There is the observance of what is it reflecting to me. Like if I'm in a situation where I don't believe it's time for me to go, and yet there's such a dissonance of where I am and where everybody around me is, then the question to ask your guidance is, what am I to do? Not only what am I to do, but really what am I to be in this situation? Am I just to be the one that holds the space that allows that for others around me to recognize that they can do the same? One of the things that I had spoken with my husband about years ago, because I did spend 17 years in corporate with quite a successful career. And so I understand what the environment's like and everything else. So, he used to talk about, oh, well, this and this. And I knew he would get caught up in like sort of the gossip circles and stuff. And I said, you can change the conversation. And he said, what do you mean? He goes, well, no, everybody's talking about this and they, have no interest in that and da-da. And when we have that kind of script going on our head saying, well, nobody has interest in that. If I don't talk, if I don't get sucked in or I don't like change myself so that I can be a part of that conversation, then nobody's going to like me. I'm not going to be included. That's all ego, right? That's what we believe is, oh, I have to do this to be a part of the group, to be accepted into the group, or accepted as human, or, stuff like that. And we laugh when we say that, but it's actually true. We do things like get into discussions about our ailments and the negative things in my life. I used to joke and say, like just stand around some coffee break place in any corporate environment, any company environment, and say, oh, yeah, I had a flat tire on my way into work today. And then see how everyone around you says, oh, yeah, I had a flat tire once and I was stuck in the middle of nowhere. And then this and this and this and this and this and this. The other one that is hysterical to listen to is when like women are pregnant in late pregnancy. Every woman who's had a child wants to tell a story about their horror story about their experience like giving birth. And it's really interesting because it's such a egoic bonding. It's a bonding of the ego, right? A bonding of that exclusion. And we're used to that connection, but then we allow that to change our authenticity and sort of drag us back down into that egoic muck. So if we stand in a place of holding a different vibration, we can change the conversation. And sometimes you're put there to change the conversation and change the vibration by changing the conversation. And that's what it was funny. Years ago, my husband and I had that talk, and I said, you can change the conversation. You can make it a positive conversation. You could say, hey, I saw this really cool video about this or something, and then wouldn't you rather talk about cute puppies and kittens and animals than, like what's bothering you today, your liver, your kidneys, whatever, your back, your legs? Because here's the thing, we let out endorphins when we have positive conversations. And our body physically responds to higher vibration conversation. And so when we have higher vibration conversation, our body responds by, letting out endorphins, which then helps us feel better physically anyway. But if we sit here and we continue to complain and we continue to delve ourselves into the negativity, then we just create more negativity and more pain and more separation. That's been part of like the perpetuation of this. And there's no judgment. It's just having this awareness of, what we tend to do is, oh, I feel great. My life is great. Everything's going great. And then I go into this group of people who are all complaining about, some physical thing, or they're tired, or they're angry, or whatever. And then what we tend to do is allow ourselves to fall in and be like, oh, trying to identify, trying to find some sameness with them in a way that causes us to be inauthentic and sort of like drags us down a little bit. And then instead of saying, hey, well, you can look at it this way, or maybe, this is inject something positive into the conversation, whatever you're guided. And that changes the scope of everything. So sometimes you're put in the place to do that. Sometimes I've been guided to go sit and literally just sit someplace where others are having a hard time. One time I was guided to stop someplace that was like an eating place and just go in and have a glass of something to drink. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, this is so bizarre. And then sort of sitting there, overheard and sort of felt this weird tingly thing. And then I sort of overheard these two women talking, and one was crying and everything else. And I was like, oh, okay, so I'm guided to sit here and to hold this space to help her allow that stuff to come out and to shift her own vibration. So as we get more conscious and more aware and more actively managing our individual vibration, then we can simply hold it regardless of what others are doing, right? So we don't have to change our vibration. And I'm not saying that with judgment, because people are like, oh, well, like they're so lower vibration, blah, 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 that's all ego. What I'm saying is, you will note we are in such a habit of the addiction of negativity in this reality that we are blind to it often, or we're in just the habit of accepting it, right? The other thing that I've been looking at lately that's been really interesting, and it came from watching this movie Bliss on Amazon Prime. I think it just came out like last weekend. My husband and I watched it over the weekend, and it was fabulous. It was so fabulous, and it actually took about 48 hours for it to really sort of like settle in, because it was such an insightful movie about our choices to come and incarnate here, right? And our choices to have the gritty experience. And what I loved about it was, my husband and I were talking, and it was like funny because it was very much like in The Matrix when Agent Smith is talking to Morpheus about how, we tried doing a Matrix where everything was like paradise, and humans couldn't accept that. They wanted grief and sorrow and resistance and negativity. So we had to create a grittier kind of experience for them to accept the Matrix as reality, which is sort of ironic because, and so this movie Bliss is sort of the same kind of thing where we're in a natural state of bliss, right? And we talk about this, we're like in our wholeness, when we're outside of separation, in our whole consciousness, we are like beyond what we can even perceive as blissful. That's why when we go into meditation and we let go of our separation and just allow ourselves to melt back into the oneness and the wholeness, it feels so incredible. And the more we then, let ourselves sort of come back into separation, the more, we feel a little more grounded, a little heavier, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so this movie, it's great. I definitely recommend watching it with an open heart, an open mind, and open consciousness, because it's sort of a playing out of that concept of us being in this natural state of bliss. And the way they do it is we're actually in this reality of bliss, and we're all taken care of. Our lives are great, and we have to create an alternate reality where we have all this grit. Good morning, Vanessa. We have all this grit and negativity, and some, because some get really impatient and unhappy with just having the bliss. So if you think about that, right, and you look around you, so the reason I'm explaining this is because after I looked at that, and it's funny because I've talked about it for years. I've talked about knowing that we love this. We love the separation. We love the tactile feeling. We love what if it's gonna go. Oh, good morning, Gloria. Good morning, Ashmin. I just scrolled down and saw the comments. But if we go and look at you know, how much we've loved how the heaviness and the density and the separation and the pain and suffering and angst actually feels, because it feels. And it's almost like when we leave here, it becomes, it's like in psychology, they call it negative reinforcement, right? So, negative reinforcement is that you take away a negative stimulus as motivation for somebody to do something, right? So, good morning, Nicole. So, yeah, so it's almost like dying here is negative reinforcement of we go through this heavy duty, sometimes heavy duty, and Sarah Sieg Avignon and I were talking about this the other day. We go through this heavy, often suffering, kind of like dying process to be released of that heaviness and separation in this it's almost like a shot of bliss, because it's like the removal of that separation or the peeling back of that meat jacket is like this, almost like this high, that we've gotten addicted to. So when we start looking at that and we start looking at what's around us, it's interesting to say, well, okay, some of us are getting to be done with the thrill of the separation and the grittiness and the thrill of the suffering and the lack and the neglect and all that kind of stuff. So some of us are saying, okay, I see it for what it is. I see it for, for its completion, and I'm ready to just be in that blissful state all the time, right? Or just in a less intense state. I mean, there's so many different levels of separation in this multiverse, so we're just playing in this all the time. But it's like, okay, so, but this level of grittiness and separation, I think I understand is one of the biggest and deepest. So it's like, okay, if I'm almost ready to let go of that, right? Then I'm in this place of saying, okay, well, I'm here. So what if the whole, like, say 80% of the world is in that place of grittiness and immersion of separation and good morning, Doug, of separation and suffering and anger and war and all that kind of stuff. So, it's interesting that, so Sarah Sieg Avignon and I, the one that I do my 28 days, oh, that's not, but that when I do my Ascended World podcast with on Monday, we're doing this class that is this online course called 28 Days of Forgiveness. And we're covering all of these things of not only forgiving, but apologizing, forgiving, accepting, embracing, and then having gratitude for the completion of this whole cycle of that experience. So it's almost like what it is for us to do here. So it's like when we get to that place of saying, okay, well, I apologize and forgive myself for loving this so much, for loving this level of separation, for loving the suffering and the pain and the lack and the grit, because with that gives us the depth that we perceive. It gives us, the shadow, gives us the rainbow. There's so much that there is for us to see with that reflection of contrast, right? And we've become so addicted to it. So when we get to that place of saying, oh, you know what? I think I'm good now, right? To accept that in that place of apology and forgiveness and embracing it and having gratitude for it and saying, oh my God, what a freaking awesome run this has been. And to say, yeah, okay, I'm ready for what's next. That's different. And so I feel like more and more of us are getting there. That's what I was leading up to with this discussion is it's like more and more of us are getting there. So when we get to this place of getting to be done and not feeling like we're addicted to that anymore, and then we see so much of that still around us, right? Knowing that in wholeness, that's all us too, right? So this piece of me, this individual part of me is getting done. And the more we say, okay, I'm done, and I come to that apology and forgiveness and, all that I call it that cycle, that circle in wholeness and completion, then it's a matter of looking at those around us and knowing as part of us, they're still enjoying the depth of that, to say, okay, well, I'm just honoring you and I get it. What was funny was when I was looking at stuff this way, all of a sudden I realized, wow, you know what? I have people in my life who they just are very immersed in the negativity, and I've just sort of accepted that, and then I just don't have those kind of conversations with them. I've learned how to change the conversation, or been guided to change the conversation. But I'll just listen to what they have, hold space, and then, move on. But when I saw this in this light, I was like, well, part of some people like get to that place of, okay, this is one of my last lives, or this is my last life as a human here in this density. Right? Many of us are here to do that. And so we've immersed ourselves so deeply into that separation and pain and suffering and lack that we want to really just immerse ourselves in it and enjoy it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's funny because the ego says, what do you mean enjoy it? Because it's the contrast that we have fallen in love with. Because when you pull that away, the negative reinforcement, then we realize how incredibly blissful and powerful we are. We remember that, right? Except, so it's been that lessons of contrast that we have been so extremely in love with. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, okay, we're coming to the close of this. So to come to the close of it is to say, okay, let me just, really have, it's like saying, okay, you have a week to live. I always say that to people. I'm like, you can choose the way you live. Say you're given a week to live and you're definitely going to die in a week. Okay, what are you going to do in that week? Okay, well, what if you know that this is your last life ever and you've been here 1,000 lives and you've loved it and just immersed yourself in so many of these really rich experiences here. And this is your last life. It's like, okay, well, I'm just going to, what if it's like, okay, I'm just going to have a freaking awesome time. So you could so you can choose what that awesome time is. So the awesome time could be like really, really pushing yourself to the depths of despair, so that when you're out, it becomes such a burst of bliss and remembrance that you just, that was what you wanted to complete that cycle. Or you can just say, I'm just going to really have that bliss here and see what it's like to have that bliss while still being able to be in separation. And so, it's just different choices for everyone. And it's really interesting when you pull in that particular feeling and that perception, you can just say, oh, you know what? I am just going to observe everybody, and I'm going to hold that space of love and wholeness, and knowing that that's another part of me, is the faceted divine that we are, and even the faceted collective consciousness of the earth dimensions that we've created, right? To say, okay, well, there are still parts of me that love it. And then this part of me is done and I'm doing it this way. And so we could do all of that. But then it sort of comes to a completely different level of understanding, because it's funny that, like, so this one individual who's in my reality, who's so very negative, and I'm just like, oh, well, yeah, just go for it. Enjoy yourself. Enjoy it. And there's no judgment on that. It's like, okay. So then when we come to that, right, one of the questions I get so often is, well, what, like, how do I help somebody? How do I help them change? And if your guidance is this simply what they are choosing to experience, then you can choose to let them experience it and just hold a space of love. And when they get done with it, wipe off their hands or their shoulders. They could just say, okay, good, I'm done now. Because we do the same thing individually. So we might be in a great place vibrationally one day, and then the sexiness of that addiction starts to pull us back into like one thing or another, and we'll have one thing then that makes us sort of feel that weirdness again or that lack again, and then we'll snap back. And it's as we come back into more and more remembrance, it's that we sort of snap back faster, and then we eliminate the need to have more and more of those situations. So there's a lot to consider here. Excuse me a second. There's a lot to consider here, because it's a completely different way of perceiving everything around us in terms of and individuals around us. And I really, like I said, I highly recommend you watching that movie. It's a great movie, Bliss, on Prime Video. And it, like I said, it took me about 48 hours for it to really sort of sink in, because I was like, oh, that's so bizarre. Because, the way it's sort of the first initial shock is, well, what's reality and what's not reality? Of course, we know that everything's reality, or everything is an illusion anyway, so it doesn't matter, right? We get to that. It's like, it's sort of like, oh, is dream state real and this isn't, or vice versa? There's like these questions, and it's like, well, it's all real or it's all illusion. It's however we want to see it. But coming to that place of acceptance and seeing it around us and having the clarity to step back, and instead of compulsively reacting in a situation like that, where those around you are in a very negative place when you're not, or whatever, is to have the non-judgment, to have the acceptance, to not judge others for where they are when you're not there, right? And vice versa. And then don't judge yourself for where you are if somebody else around you seems to be in a better place, or whatever. It's all what we're choosing, right? So part of it does have to do with this. And it's funny, it's this whole forgiveness thing has been such a big topic this month with the 28 days that Sarah and I are doing. And just by the way, just to let you know, if you're not in the program and you're interested, we have it still open registration for $28 for the 28 days. And it's all recordings, and you have a discussion board. There's a discussion forum within the course on the website, and you get a workbook, and you get exercises every day. And it's like 15-minute video, 10 to 15-minute video, and 5 minutes of exercises every day. And it's just, I'm just saying this because it feels so natural to be a part of this. And we're talking about everything from the collective level, disasters, and I have the list here somewhere. Disasters and government and crimes and cruelty and injustices, and then we get down to like individual stuff, and we get to relationships, and then within the self. So we're covering the entire gamut of that whole cycle of apology, forgiveness, acceptance, embracing, loving, having gratitude for, and completion, right? And so if you want to join us, it's great. For like only through the month of February, we're doing it for $28. After that, I think we're going to probably make it about $100. So, because it's really actually worth much more than that. So I really would love for you to, if you're not in it and you want to take a part, go and sign up. Do one a day. And it's incredible. I'll tell you, incredible the insight we've had just by doing them, and then going back and being participants, as well as being the ones who did the recordings as well. So you go over to Ascended World, and all the information's over there. Or you can go to ascendedworld.net, and the information's up on there. But anyhow, that was my little plug for today. But it really ties in, because I just can't. It's incredible how everything seems so different and so clear and easy to perceive without any judgment there. And the judgment comes from stuff that is being held inside of us, judgments about all those things that I was listing, and more. So for you this week is to look at that, look at what you're thinking about those who are around you, and then shift, shift your thoughts to, well, okay, what if they want to immerse themselves? First of all, ask your guidance. What is there for me to do here? What is there for me to be? And if you get nothing, then just say, well, is it for them to, is it something that they just are ready to? Oh, Gloria says, really is a great program. Thank you. Yeah, I love it. Honestly, it's even better than we even thought it was going to be. I was like going through it. I'm like, this is incredible how much is covered. If I do say so myself. But anyway, so this week, look at, if you look at stuff with that eye of, it's my choice to be here, right? And you ask your guidance, is there anything for me to do? Is there anything for me to be? And you get no. And ask, is this what they're choosing because it's what they are wanting to immerse themselves in? And you might get yes. And if you do, then all you can do is hold that space of love. It's all we can do anyway, because we can't do something for somebody. If we do it, just like if it's part of their journey, it's for them to complete. And if our guidance is not to interfere or intervene, but to just hold space, and that's all there is for us to do. And it is probably the biggest act of love for us. We culturally call it being non-compassionate or cold, right? But it's not. It's actually being the most compassionate, being the most considerate, because the more we hold each other's space and know that, by the way, we each can complete exactly what we came here to complete. And if we're guided to be a part, that's great. And if we're not, that's great. And when we honor that within ourselves and within each other, then we get done faster. And then we get this whole thing completed, which is my understanding what we're going for. So just have that observance this week. It's a very different way of looking at things. If anything, just go watch that movie Bliss. It's really interesting. It's just really interesting. It was very cool, very well done. Have a great week. Thank you for joining me. This is Angela Coulter signing off with this week's Living the Shift. Bye.